Today, we're going to talk about how to demo code, which I always thought was interesting because it's one of the most difficult things when it comes to development because you'll do something like truly impressive. So you'll crack something that's very hard to crack, but it's hard to tell somebody because they would have to be like at your level of knowledge or of even in your niche, right? Because there's people doing different stuff and they don't necessarily understand all the code in the world, and it's just very hard to convey. I thought I'd start with the basics because I think they're very important. They kind of tie into the story. So the demo 101 is the most important. Like, it's just 3 principles that I stick to when it comes to demoing stuff. One is keep it clean, the other one's detail matter the most, and the last one's practice if necessary. We'll kind of go over these in a little bit more detail as we go, but practice if necessary is the one that I never thought of doing until I believe Seth suggested it to me, and he said, if you're like not sure how to demo stuff or you think there's going to be a kink, record yourself, grab QuickTime, grab Loom, and demo it as you would to a client. Then you'll run into a few issues, you can address those, and then once the actual demo happens, they're just going to be gone. So like last time when I was doing this, I had to like switch microphones and cameras on the fly, so I had no idea how long it takes for Zoom to catch up to that. So I just hopped on a Zoom call with myself, recorded it, tested it, saw like okay, it's about 3 seconds here, and then it was just easier when doing it live. So the practice aspect isn't necessarily something that crossed my mind like out of the blue, but when Seth suggested it to me, it made like all the sense in the world. One more thing, sometimes software can be like weird, right? So if I'm demoing something, let's say I'm demoing a mobile app and I run it, I build the app, I run it, I showcase what I want, I'm happy with the outcome. I'm not even going to close the emulator. I'm not going to rebuild the project. I'm not going to pull down any new changes. I'm just going to leave it as is because that's what worked. And then next time I come to it in like an hour, when I actually have to present it, I'm sure it's going to work, right? So there's no like last minute changes or anything along those lines. If I catch an error, I'll fix it. Even nowadays with the size of the projects that we're working on, I will take the last day. So like if a demo's Friday, Thursday is the last day we introduce changes. And then Friday, if something needs to be fixed, it can be, but making sure everything runs, making sure the demo is correct is more important than getting a border color fix last minute. So going over this is a weird demo screenshot. So let's say we're on a call and demoing the app. And if this is the screen you're sharing, you might want to reconsider because sure, there's a terminal behind and it has useful information. And maybe one of the devs cares for it. But when you look at this screen, there's, aside from the extreme clutter here, right? There's an error right in the middle of the app that you're trying to represent. Now, I know this is a warning and this goes away if you just ignore it, but the people that are looking at it may not. So addressing stuff like this is way more important than addressing like even the bigger stuff. Like if something doesn't work and you can explain why it doesn't work, that's fine. But if you're presenting something that works and there's an error like right smack dab in the middle of it, then it's a little bit weird. So I went ahead and created a little heat map. If this is how you're trying to demo something, this is where people are looking. Oh, obviously, it's a fake heat map. I just mocked it in a piece of software. But this is where nobody's looking here, right? And then here's where everything's interesting. Like I can see your file names. I can see what you have on your desktop. I can see all the menu bar apps, all the dock apps. I'm like, oh, this guy has Discord running. Is he a gamer? And this is all I'm thinking about. Like, I don't necessarily care about what you're trying to show me when this is the screen that I'm looking at, right? So this is obviously an extreme example, but I just figured to go over it in that sense to establish sort of a baseline. But here's one that's not as simple as the first one. So if you look at this looks clean enough, right? I'm sharing one window. Whatever I'm trying to show you is in focus. But if you look at the other tabs that are called other weird tabs, they can also detract attention from your point, right? So, and it doesn't have to be this obvious. Like, it doesn't have to be something that's like groundbreaking. But again, if you're sharing Figma, let's say, which is a design software that we use, and I see 6 more tabs, I'm looking at those tabs first. That's my main point of focus because I want to know what else are you doing, because obviously you're going to tell me about what you did, and that's great, but I'm just curious. So, you're kind of losing a lot of attention when doing stuff like this. And attention's truly important when it comes to demos because you want to keep it short and sweet, but you also want to convey your point. And if your point's within the first 20 seconds of sharing a screen like this, you just didn't convey anything. So the question becomes, when do we show code? So these are kind of the principles that I stick to. But to be like perfectly honest with you, the answer is probably never. Unless you're in a dev-only meeting, you're almost never going to want to demo any code. But these are the occasions where it's okay to show code. So if it's short, long, funny, if you just want to crack a joke, or if the screenshot's pretty, right? And the last one's kind of weird and it's pretty new, but if I'm writing a document and I can make a pretty code screenshot, I will do that certainly because it looks good. But I also understand nobody's going to read that. So let's go over that. When the code is short, so whoever is familiar with the project that we're working on, one of them requires us to scan an ID in real time using any webcam. So if you have a PC or a Mac and a webcam, if you just hold your ID to it, it's going to automatically scan and get the info. And this is a piece of code that draws a green rectangle around the ID and moves as you move, right? And it's only like 5 lines of code. So that's interesting. But also, like, nobody's going to read this. Any developer looking at this knows this isn't the whole story, because it starts with a return, so there has to be more code. But essentially, this is the code that handles this. Again, nobody's going to care for it, but you can always be like, yeah, it was like a lot of work, and then you show 5 lines of code. And then everybody laughs and you move on, right? If this is the focus of the demo, that's going to be strange. So the second one is just a quick one, but it's just a deterrence when you're just talking about it and you're like, oh yeah, it was very easy to do. It only took like 1,700 lines of code. And then everybody's like, whoa, that's a lot. But this one's kind of a misconception because, like any dev knows, more lines of code isn't always better. It could even mean that whoever's doing it doesn't know what they're doing. But it is an interesting conversation piece for like 10 seconds during the demo, right? So maybe use this one with care. Maybe know your audience is the correct answer here. But yeah, this is just like, I did this maybe 2 or 3 times during my entire career because it was funny and because for whatever reason we had to have extremely large files in that context. So I'm not sure that this is the one you want to be using, but it happens from time to time that you can kind of plug this one in. So this one's an interesting one because the answer is when the code's funny, you can show it, right? So here I have two screenshots that are funny. But again, it's very, very hard to notice because people that are not devs, they don't necessarily look at an interface like this all the time. So first of all, you would have to explain that this is a diff, right? This is old code, this is new code, assuming that people aren't familiar with GitHub. And then you would have to explain that if you typo something with a capital A instead of a lowercase a, it's just not going to work. But then I think you would, to make this actually funny, you would have to explain the way it would break. And that's just like pushing it, right? Because like if a dev looks at this and you're like, it took me a week to find this issue, they're going to laugh. It's funny to them. But if a non-dev person just looks at this, they're going to be like, oh, you just typoed something, big deal. But like devs know how often this happens when you typo something and you just spend like hours looking for the issue. And then you're like, oh, wow. So that in that sense, it's funny, right? Because funny is obviously subjective. And this one as well, like you're just missing a selector here. But if you spend a week trying to find this, that is funny. So when it comes to humor and trying to show funny code, the answer is not always, maybe, it's not always the code. But sometimes it's the commit messages. I do this from time to time. Obviously, I'm a professional, but I'm also human. And sometimes I don't want to talk about a commit message. So I don't want to talk about this one or, hack the life out of an emoji selector, stuff like that. But again, to non-dev people, do they know what a commit is? Do they know who can read this? Do they know if this is okay to do, not okay to do? What is common practice? So when it comes to this one, it's a little weird. Like just reading this, yeah, okay, I don't want to talk about this one, haha, that's fine. But you just move on, right? You don't linger on this one if you choose to demo something like this. And then when you want to insert a joke, obviously, like here, I have a video of myself scrolling. I think it was the same file with over like 1,700 lines of code. And the video is obviously choppy for you because Zoom likes chopping stuff up. But yeah, imagine a smooth video of me scrolling 1700 lines of code. But again, that's just if you're already sharing your screen and you're trying to crack a joke, maybe break the tension, that's perfectly fine. But if this is what you're trying to showcase, maybe reconsider the approach. And this one, obviously, is great because the screenshot is very, very pretty. There's a service called, it's carbon.now.sh, and it will let you paste any line of code in any language and make it look however you want to. So they have like themes and drop shadows, and you can really design it. So this is more if you're doing a document for somebody and you just want to add something there, but devs won't appreciate this. This is more of a formal thing, like if you're, I don't know, writing a paper about doing some research or writing a paper about something, and you can just add a piece of code there and it looks great. But I mean, devs will look at this, be like, oh, what is the service that you used to make that screenshot? That's great, thank you. But like at that point, you're just doing Carbon a service by advertising them, and that's it. Like, it's not interesting, nobody's gonna read it, but it does look good. So in case you decide to opt in and do that one, you can. So when it comes to sharing code, here's another bad idea. This is my text editor, and this, for a non-dev person, there's a lot going on here. They're not familiar with the interface. They don't know where this should be looking, even though I've highlighted a piece of text here, which is the estimated check-in, and I may be trying to make a point during that call. They're gonna find this new and interesting, and they're not used to staring at where the code is. So this is, again, a heat map of where people might or may not be looking, because if you look at the clean screenshot again, there's a whole bunch of red on the right-hand side, and that's interesting. Why is that red? So that's like immediately drawing, like even as a dev, I'm going to check that out because that's a lot of red, and red means bad typically. So why is there a lot of bad, and why are you showing me the one thing that's not red? You know what I mean? That's a little odd. Even in this context, like again, you're sharing just one window. There's no weird tabs. There's like a tree to the side. Even in this context, it's going to be very hard to convey your point, whatever that might be, especially if you have a lot of people that aren't developers and that aren't used to looking at code. Because a dev necessarily, sure, they'll glance the red, they'll look, oh, you're using VS Code, you're using this theme, that's fine. And then they'll focus on what you're trying to say. But a non-dev person is just going to be like, that's a lot of colors, I like that, I'm going to look at every single thing and just, familiarize myself with the interface because they're just not used to it. So even like the auxiliary stuff, like the fact that Travis wrote this line of code will be more interesting than the line of code itself. So yeah, this is again a very simple heat map of I guess this is my approximation of where people are looking. It's pseudoscience really. I didn't actually do like a user study with eye tracking software to figure out where people are looking, but it's just an approximation of what might happen if you share your editor like this, right? So here's another one that's a little bit maybe counterintuitive. So if you compare this one to the one I've shown before, what you can see here is that it's a lot cleaner. I've removed the sidebar, I've removed the bottom bar, I've removed everything that should not be in focus. I have an emulator here that has the app, and on to the left-hand side, I have two functions, and that's it. There's no red, there's no colors, there's no auxiliary information that's not important. It's just what I'm looking at, right? But even this is a little bit weird because, again, non-devs, like you would have to explain everything from the get-go to be able to explain, like, what are you doing and why are you doing this? This has really one use case when talking about a non-dev meeting is when you're trying to demo what happens when you do something that was asked of you. So somebody asks you, can you do this and this? Like, is this possible? And then you're like, no. And then you have trouble explaining that. So you're like, let me show you. And then there's an isolated piece of code that does one thing. You change what they want and you show them what the implications of that change are. And that's really the only use case that this has, even though by definition, it is very, very clean and it's tailor-made to be non-distracting. Obviously, like I had to go in VS Code and disable a whole bunch of stuff, which I don't typically do because like I do need it. So it's a huge pain for not a lot of gain, I'd say, when it comes to something like this. So yeah, I would definitely stay away from this one unless you're talking to a whole bunch of devs, in which case it doesn't really matter. You can show them like a dirty view as well, and they're not going to mind. They're just going to focus on solving the problem and moving on with their day. So what is the takeaway when it comes to demoing code? Planning your presentation more, I think, is key. deciding what you want to show and what you don't want to show. If you're working on a huge project and you change a button color, that's maybe not important. So if you want to run over it, if like, let's say there's a sprint, there's 2 weeks, and all you did was a whole bunch of minor changes, it would maybe make more sense to somehow sort them and present them in a quick fashion, and then just kind of run over them instead of going, one by one and thinking about it and being like, where was that button again? Oh, I'm sorry, this is the wrong screen. This isn't what I meant to show you. Oh, that's where the button is here. I changed this color to red. I mean, that's just weird. So there's not a real point in doing that. Make sure the area you're demoing is clean. We've gone over this extensively, and I've shown you a few examples of what can be deemed clean but isn't really. Make sure the details are right. Now, this is set 100% because typically when we spoke about a project, I believe it was yesterday, I said that sometimes it makes sense to just kind of speed things up. So if you're thinking about a new project and you need a logo, it makes more sense to give somebody on Fiverr a little bit of money to make you one than to overthink it, right? When it comes to details of a presentation, the exact opposite is true. It makes all the sense in the world for you to overthink every single detail in what you're showcasing. Because there are scenarios where you're going to have, let's say, a messenger application. And if you choose the wrong pictures, the wrong profile pictures for the mock data, it's just going to look weird, even though the design itself is not weird. So paying attention to small things, like if I hop back to this pester demo, paying attention to this emoji right here. That emoji is the most important thing. Everything else you're trying to showcase doesn't matter that much, but this emoji is super important. Depending on which one you pick is going to make or break this design, right? It would take like a while to explain how hard it is to design for every use case. There's a lot of emojis, and maybe not all of them fit into this circle or this design or this screenshot. So if you pick the wrong one, the design is going to feel off. Nobody's going to necessarily notice it, but it's going to feel off. And if you imagine this was a social network, let's say, and this was a news feed, the thing that would matter the most are the status updates. Which words did you pick there? Small stuff like that is what makes or breaks the demo for sure. So I would definitely focus more on that than trying to showcase code. Make sure the content of the demo itself is clean. We went over this with the VS Code where it seemed clean. If I hop back to it, where this seems like rather clean in a sense, but it's not really. So making sure that whatever you're showcasing, and sometimes you can push it to the extreme, but sometimes it's the weird stuff. If you open a search box in an app that you're trying to demo, and the last thing you typed in there was Papa John's Pizza, that's a little weird. So small stuff like that. There's always a way to fine tune the user experience is what it is for the people that are watching your demo. I once did a demo where I had to tab out of the application to showcase something. And my main choices for that demo were which application do I switch to and what does that application show? Because I needed a small app that's not intrusive, so I picked a calculator, right? And then I put a funny number in the calculator because it seems like low effort if you just open up a default app and switch to it while you're demoing something that's supposed to happen in the background. And then, the last one for sure is practice if necessary, is literally going over the demo exactly as you want it and going over it many times if need be. And then you're going to come up with something that you're happy with. Now, this all sounds like a whole bunch of unnecessary work just to demo something, right? But presentation is pretty much half the play. So if I'm the best dev in the world, but I can't convey that, I'm in trouble. So here, it kind of becomes your routine. You're at some point, you're going to start thinking, okay, the code is fine. The app that I'm trying to showcase is fine. Which details do I have to worry about? And after a certain point, you're already going to know, like, okay, this is a potential pitfall. If I try to restart the app midway, my wallpaper on the simulator is a little bit weird. So you're going to start paying more and more attention to the details. And as you progress through this, your code's going to get better, your product's going to get better, it's going to work. You're not going to have to worry too much about that. You'll just run through the demo once, make sure every click of a button does what you want it to do, but then you're going to focus only on the details. And the big takeaway is, if you don't have to show code, maybe don't show it. But if you want to show a code, there's a few options where it's reasonable and where it makes sense to show code. But yeah, generally, as a dev, a better solution might be finding some dev friends that are really good. And then when you do something impressive, you can tell them and they'll be happy for you, rather than using a company-wide demo call to showcase a piece of code or to change something live and be like, look how easy it is or something like that. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
I was thinking that I think through a lot of these things on my own, but your point about kind of like the pseudo heat maps and like if there is something that you're not presenting about that's shown on the screen, like that's exactly what everyone is going to be interested in. And I know that's like true for me when I see someone else's screen. So like even having different tabs open in Figma and stuff like that, because we're working with multiple clients, I think that's a really, really good point. The interest will be drawn to whatever you're not presenting about, because that's the mysterious object. And so to remove those types of distractions, I think that's a really good point.
I agree. That was my biggest takeaway too. Definitely.
Yeah, if you allow it, right? Because if you're sharing your screen and you're like, I only have Figma here. I'm laser focused on what I'm trying to show. We have 6 tabs open, and one of the tabs says Apple project name 2.0. The first thing I'm doing is I'm Googling the project name. I'm not even looking at the screen anymore, but I am Googling Apple project name 2.0. What is this? Who are these people? About us page, look at the team. Do I know them? Stuff like that. So that's going to detract my attention immediately. And the cool thing about this is that there are people that make these software solutions that thought of this. So for the most part, a lot of software has what you call presentation mode. So even Figma, which I know, like, trying to showcase something in Figma with all the panels hidden away is hard, because you'll click the wrong thing, you're going to move something that's not locked, you're going to do something weird. But if you remove the side panels in Figma specifically, I don't see your layer names anymore. So if one of your layers is called, I really hate this square, that I'm not going to see that. So that's like, kind of another thing. And typically a lot of software has a way of you hiding the interface and just showing what you want to show. And I know it's annoying, but I mean, that's how human brains work, I think, is just trying to look, oh, this is what he wants me to see. And what is it like? Where's the stuff he doesn't want me to see? That's what I care for. Like, I don't care. Like, this is fine. Like, you're doing an excellent job. Thank you. But like, let me see the other stuff.
I'm wondering, like, piggybacking off of this, I always have all the tabs that I'm planning on sharing, but then I think it follows your same point that they'll be thinking about those future tabs. Do you think that stopping and starting screen share to get to your different like parts would be a way to kind of keep the focus, or is that like a no? You know what I mean? Like, how would you navigate that if you had multiple things lined up to show?
That's a good question. I guess it depends of the context. Like, if I had something like where I have 3 tabs that are tightly tied to one topic, I would definitely keep them in a window, but I would pull them out of my main Chrome window, or you just use a different browser. And then I would like make sure my bookmarks bar is hidden. I would make sure I don't have any extensions loaded, the auxiliary stuff. But I think generally, I think it's fine to keep a few tabs in the browser as long as they're pertinent, because sure, everybody, as you share your screen, you're showing one tab, everybody's gonna look for the other 3, let's say, but they are relevant to what you're doing.
Right.
I mean, if you wanted to take it to the extreme, you could always like memorize the tab order and quickly tab between them. But I've also like seen people do the reshare implicitly. So if you're talking about one thing, there's one window doing one thing only, and when you're like, oh, maybe let's Google this and see what happens, they will stop the screen share. Because if it's Zoom, then you can just change the window that you're doing this in. So they'll do this in a different window. They'll just click, and without interrupting the, gone away from full screen experience, they will just change the window that they're sharing. And they'll keep, I mean, Travis, you do this, I think, often when we're switching between apps and when we're doing stuff. But yeah, that's perfectly fine, just switching windows like that on the fly. This isn't true for all software, though. Not all software supports this. But if it is Zoom, yeah, I think it's perfectly fine.
That's cool. Yeah, I didn't know that Zoom would leave it in that full screen when you toggled between like, now I want to share this one. So that's nice that that's built in. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest advice I can ever give anybody is do not use your browser for demoing stuff ever, because of the typing suggestions, because of the autofill, because of the whatever. That's just like, there's a lot of information where you don't expect it. Like, you can flash the last 4 digits of your credit card if you're showing a payment form. You can flash any first last name combo you ever added to any form on the entire internet, if you just click like a registration page and you're like, it's very innocent, you know, you're just trying to show like, oh look, I can register on this site. You just click and there's like a huge list of first last name combos. So yeah, I mean, the best, like, if depending on the audience, right? If I'm doing an internal call, that's fine. We all know each other. We're all friends. I'll share my entire screen. I don't care if somebody sees my desktop. But, you know, if there's a lot of external audience, yeah, I'll definitely make sure to not use. So, like, for instance, I never use Firefox. So I'll just open Firefox and demo there. And I know there's nothing there because I've set mine to clear every time I close it. So I know there's no data. I mean, it does sound extreme, but with this working from home stuff, I'm sure you noticed that a lot of people are struggling with these like virtual communication concepts. As we spoke about last time, you know, having your dog barking behind you as you're trying to talk and stuff like that is weird. But also, like, you know, something as simple as sharing your screen and trying to show something can be weird, especially when dealing with people that don't know you. So that, you know, people that in an UX cabin for sure already know like my screen layout and they're familiar with it. So it's not new. So it's not going to detract their attention from what I'm trying to show. But yeah, I mean, the people that don't know me, they're like, oh, this is interesting. That looks good. What icon is that? You know, so demo code, like the presentation would be just one slide saying don't do it. But I kind of thought I just weave it into the more generalized topic of, you know, screen sharing and software sharing and stuff like that. So it kind of fits into that subject a little bit better, I think. Thank you.